this light was shining over my shoulders.
I began to see a small, bright, brilliant glow that got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Y yo miré que estaba bien brilloso, una luz tan brillante.
And it's the brightest thing you can imagine, but I could look at it. And I never, ever wanted to leave.
64.6% of near-death experiencers describe an unearthly, beautiful, mystical light. They feel overwhelming love. It's sort of like a million times a million of any love they ever felt on earth.
They did see the magnificence of just the light shining forth in everything, bringing life to everything.
And the light was not just something you would see. This was really a light born out of love.
Yo sé que esa luz que yo vi era la luz de Dios.
This God of light. This God is personal. He knows them like no one has ever known them.
He loves me so much. By the time I'm thinking of him loving me, it's old news because he even loves me more.
Then I felt this tremendous amount of love, and I knew I was in the presence of God.
Well, welcome back to our What's Afterlife discussion. We've talked about the scientific evidence for the afterlife, relationships in heaven, and the beauty of heaven. The truth is, different people hope for different things in heaven. Some hope for sailing, like me. Some hope for beautiful houses. Some hope for all-you-can-eat chocolate chip cookies and pizza bars. The truth is, some of us are just searching for the wrong things. But honestly, after years of research and listening to people having near-death experiences, there's no doubt what the highlight of heaven will be: God. What's astonishing is how consistently people who encounter God all across the globe describe this same being. God is light and love. They sometimes describe a man of brilliant light, brighter than the sun, but easy to look at, in fact, mesmerizing. And not an impersonal force, a very personal, sometimes even humorous being who knows them like no one has ever known them. All around the globe, they know this God intuitively. God is love beyond the wildest imagination, an all-knowing love that sees right through you, knows everything, good and bad, and yet loves you more than a mother, father, grandparent, spouse, lover ever could, times 1,000. And in His presence, indie ears never want to leave. Of all the beauty and wonder and colors and mountains and valleys and loving reunions with family and friends, nothing compares, they say, to the presence of God. I'm convinced when you and I see God for the first time, we will finally realize you are what I've been longing for all this time. As neurosurgeon Dr. Eben Alexander said of his NDE and his encounter with God, one of the biggest mistakes people make when they think about God is to imagine God as impersonal. Yes, God is behind the numbers, the perfection of the universe, but God is even more human than you and I are. He understands and sympathizes with our human situation more profoundly and personally than we can even imagine. Think about that as you discuss these questions. All across the globe, indie ears consistently describe the same God of brilliant light, love, personal, full of life. But has this God of love only recently been revealed through these NDEs? Or has God been revealing Himself all along? Many indie ears encountered Jesus in their experience, sometimes completely unexpected. Maybe they grew up Jewish or Muslim. And yet this brilliant man of light and love, who they knew was God, they also knew was Jesus. 2 Scandinavian researchers studied 500 Americans and 500 Indians to determine how much religious or cultural conditioning shaped one's NDE. They reported this: the various Vedic loci of an afterlife, or Hindu heaven, were never mentioned, nor were reincarnation and dissolution in Brahma, the formless aspect of God, which is the goal of Indian spiritual striving. The concept of karma, accumulation of merits and demerits, may have been vaguely suggested by reports of a, quote, white-robed man with a book of accounts, end quote. The man with this book of accounts is always pictured as a benign ruler. An aura of sacredness rests upon him, regardless of whether he's called, quote, the man in the white robe, or, quote, God. When I was a skeptical engineer, one of the things that opened my mind was the consistent description of NDEs, what they conveyed about God, and how that aligned with the Bible's description of God. Like Moses in approximately 1500 BCE said God appeared as light in a burning bush whose fire never dies. The Jewish prophet Daniel records seeing the same brilliant man of light and recorded it in 500 BCE. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, his voice like the sound of a multitude. Jesus claimed to be revealing God's sacrificial love, but in a form we could relate to. In one account, Jesus' followers reported seeing him transfigured briefly in physical appearance and described what NDEers see. His face shone like the sun, his clothes became as white as the light. And Jesus claimed, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Now, Paul, a Jewish Pharisee, was out killing Christians for claiming Jesus was the Jewish Messiah risen from the dead. And then Paul encountered this brilliant God of light on the Damascus road. This God of light turns out to be Jesus. Paul went on to write many New Testament books. And then John, in the book of Revelation, the last book written in the Bible, sees the risen Jesus, his face brighter than the sun. The same God who NDEers described from India to Singapore, New Zealand to the Middle East aligns with the God that Jesus claimed to reveal. I've heard NDEers in Farsi speak in Portuguese, Spanish, describing meeting Jesus when they clinically died. Some people never expected to meet Jesus on the other side, yet they did. Listen.
I grew up in Council Iowa in a Jewish family. My dad had a mantra: Jesus Christ is the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on mankind. Christians are idiots for having hope. Your life has less significance than the smallest speck of dust in this infinite universe.
I had known from some time in that afternoon that I was dying. I never thought to pray, never thought about God. I knew that there was no life after death, and so the thought of death was just extremely terrifying because it just means end.
I have an overdose. All I remember is that they're loading me up into the back of the ambulance. I thought that if I died, that was it, game over, it's done.
We were in an accident where another horse ran into my horse. She reared up, flipped over backwards with me on her back, and fell across my body. As she hit my chest, I immediately left my body. I realized there was a person standing right there, and he moved forward, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and it's like, oh, Jesus, oh, hey. It's like, how you doing? I knew that I had known him my entire life. He took my hand, and we flew. It was like we had this wave of light under our feet, pushing us forward, and he was grinning from ear to ear.
I saw out of the light hands and arms emerge out of this impossibly beautiful white light. I knew it was Jesus. He just gently picked me up and held me up against him real tight, up against his chest.
There was a sense of peace, and I feel the presence of God.
When I got on the other side of the forest, that's when I saw Jesus Christ. He was real bright, brighter than any light I've ever seen, even the sun.
It was as though his hair, his eyes, his skin were all the colors simultaneously.
I cried out the name of Jesus Christ. The next moment, I felt his face. And the first thing I remember saying is, "This is love."
And I buried my face against his chest, and I put my arms around him, and he had his arms around me, and I never, ever wanted to leave.
I hope what NDEs are revealing about the God of love encourages you. Next week is going to be an eye-opener. What if this God of love were to show you your whole life in review so that you can live for what matters most? For those who experience this part of a near-death experience, the life review is the most impactful aspect that often leads to major life changes upon their return. I hope you'll come back and hear what they have to say. See you next week.
My life flashes in front of me, as big as the sky. I was reliving every moment. It was almost as we were watching the film of my life.
I saw an image that flashed into my mind, and I was 11 years old.
I'm seeing these moments from my life like I'm watching them. And it was the moments I had with my dad throwing the football, just being a kid, just a son and his father.